Just like its sister cities Loroth and Norvos, the free city of Kohor was originally founded by religious dissidents from Valyria who came to reject the religious tolerance practiced by the Valyrian freehold. These followers of a dark deity known as the Black Goat settled near the edge of an enormous primordial forest. This location suited their dark god quite well, it seems, since the Black Goat is always in search for blood sacrifice, and vast forest was full with prey. And though indeed, for the most part, blood spilled in Black Goat's honor is the blood of the animals, on holy days Dark Deity feasts on condemned criminals, and it was even heard that in times of danger, the high nobles of the city offer up their own children to their god, so that he might defend the city. No wonder that Kohor became known as the city of sorcerers, because of the widely spread beliefs that the dark arts are practiced there. Yet these accusations seldom proved right, and thus are to be considered wrong. Of course, such rumors did not appear from nothing. Maester Paul's written works on Kohoric metalworking, written during several years of residence in the so-called City of Sorcerers, became one of the main sources of these rumors. Maester wrote that he was thrice publicly whipped and cast out from the city for making too many inquiries. Eventually, his hand was removed following the allegation that he stole a Valyrian steel blade. Paul insisted that the true reason for his mutilation and final exile was discovery of blood sacrifices made by Kohoric smiths, like killing the infant slaves in their efforts to produce steel equal to that of the freehold. It is up to you if you are willing to believe shamed Maester accused of stealing, but facts are undeniable. Kohoric smiths may not produce Valyrian steel, but they are the only ones able to reforge it. So who knows, it may well be that Maester Paul was right, though it is arguably that citizens of Kohor would have simply exiled the witness of their rites of dark magic. After all, besides being known as great hunters, foresters, and smiths, Kohoric are widely acknowledged tradesmen, and as such, they should have thought better of their reputation when dealing with such a sleazy spy as Maester Paul was. Whatever the truth, undoubtedly the best smith in all the King's Landing came from Kohor, Topholmot, master blacksmith and armorer. Then again, maybe Kohorics did it right when exiled the curious Maester Paul instead of beheading him. He spread a word, and after all, sword that requires human sacrifice in the process of forging costs a lot more than the usual one, isn't it? Founders of Kohor chose city's location wisely, since it sits on a trade route between east and west, and is famed as the gateway to the east, where trading caravans bound for Waste of Rock and beyond are outfitted and provisioned before heading into dangerous wilds. Same caravans coming from the east make their first stop at Kohor. Some of those caravans are willing to sell all their goods right there in Kohor and head for home, after spending some of their fortunes in the city, of course. This trade has helped to make Kohor one of the richest of the free cities, and surely the most exotic. Some say City was 10 times richer in the times before the desolation of Sarnor, but it does not seem that the city lacks a thing, so it is truly hard to tell if City had indeed lost some of its fortunes. Besides the rich trade route on which it stands, Kohor is not in lack of its own treasures to be sold for coin or spices. The woods that surround Kohor are one of the principal sources of the city's wealth. Barges loaded with timber depart the docks of Kohor every day for the long voyage down the Coin to Dagger Lake and the markets of Selhoris, Valisar, Volonteris, and Volantis, since those cities have long ago depleted own forests. The forest of Kohor also yields up furs and pelts of all kinds, many rare and fine and highly prized, as well as silver, tin, and amber. The vast forest has never been fully explored, and it likely still conceals many mysteries and wonders. It contains elk and deer in great numbers, along with wolves, tree cats, and boars of truly monstrous size, spotted bears, and even a species of lemur, a creature known from the southern islands and continents, but rarely seen farther north. These lemurs have silver-white fur and purple eyes, and thus are sometimes called little Valyrians. The artisans of Kohor are far famed as well. Somewhat disturbing but still exquisite wood carvings can be bought in Qohor's market. Strong stone walls protect Qohor, since Qohoric are merchants, not fighters. Though it is known that shortly after the doom of Valyria, the Dragon Lord Aurion raised a host of Qohoric colonists and proclaimed himself the Emperor of Valyria. He marched with 30,000 men to claim what remained of the Valyrian peninsula, but none of them were seen again. Shortly after that, mounted Dothraki hordes burst forth from the central plains of Assos, laying chaos and destruction across the continent. Khal Temo's Khalasar consisted of at least 50,000 Dothraki, half of whom were braided warriors with bells in their hair. Temo led these 25,000 screamers in sacking and burning every town and city in his path. Aware of the Khalasar's advance, the Qohoric strengthened their walls, doubled their garrison, and hired 2 mercenary companies, the Bright Banners and the Second Sons. They also sent an envoy to Slaver's Bay to purchase 3,000 Unsullied, the eunuch soldiers of Astapor. Eventually, mercenaries fled, but those 3,000 Unsullied withstood 18 charges of Temo's screamers and saved the city. Since that time, the city's defenses have been mostly left to the Unsullied. Towards the end of the Century of Blood, Qohor formed an alliance with Norvos and broke Volantene power on the Rhoyne in a battle involving fire galleys on Dagger Lake. The Qohoric and Norvoshi are usually peaceful toward each other, although the bearded priests of Norvos consider the Black Goat of Qohor to be demonic. The free city of Loroth, unlike its sister city Qohor, is considered the poorest of the free cities. Its location, scarce resources, and history have all led to the claim of this dubious title. It is truly difficult to imagine another possible state of affairs for the city that was at one point ruled by religious fanatics who went about barefoot, dressed in hair shirts and hides, and whose priests were eunuchs who wore eyeless hoods, followers of the blind god Boash. Yet they were not the founders of the city. Ancient Loroth was founded by a people known as the Maze Makers, who created mazes on the islands and on mainland Assos to the south. One of such mazes is found on the second biggest isle of the archipelago, Lorasion, where maze makers constructed great maze covering 3/4 of the island's surface and having 4 subterranean levels. The purpose of the mazes is unknown, and we can only assume they were built as fortifications, since the legends of the Lorathi state the maze makers were destroyed by creatures of the sea, such as Merlings, Selkies, or Walrus Men. Thus, they were in the state of war and in need of heavy defensive structures. But those are only assumptions. Large bones which have been found inside the mazes indicate that maze makers were massively built and larger than men, which has led some to suggest that the maze makers were born of the unions of human man and female giants. However, when the founders of the Loroth were gone, they were followed first by a race of hairy men similar to the Ibanese, and then by the Andals. Unlike Andals, hairy men were fisher folk and lived along the coasts, shunning the great mazes of their predecessors. After Andals had swept across the islands, slaughtering the hairy man in the name of the Seven, they took their women and children as slaves and built their keeps atop haunted mazes. Andals spent the next 1,000 years warring with each other until one of their kings, Karlan the Great, conquered all the islands and lands as far south as the headwaters of the Upper Rhoyne and Noin. He raised a great wooden keep at the center of Lorasion's vast maze and decorated its halls with the heads of slain foes. In his greed for power, Karlan the Great started a war with Norvos, and that was his fatal mistake. Karlan defeated Norvoshi in 2 battles in the hills, and then marched against Norvos itself. The Norvoshi asked for help from Valyria, suddenly forgetting their previous neglect towards motherland that was separated from them by the lands of Andals and the Rhoynar at those times. And help arrived. 100 dragons burned Karlan and his host, and then headed for the Isles of Loroth. They burned all the keeps, towns, and villages on the isles, so that even great stones of the mazes were scorched and blackened by their firestorms. Afterwards, Loroth remained uninhabited for more than a century. Of course, Ibnese whalers and sealers put ashore during those silent years, but they never ventured inland, since those lands were considered cursed. Those were the men from Valyria itself who arrived in those lands to stay. That happened more than 1300 years before the Doom. Followers of Boash, also known as the Blind God, they practiced an austere lifestyle of extreme self-abnegation. They did not even consume flesh or drink wine. The faith of Boash believed that man and beast were all alike and all equally worthy, male or female, rich or poor, free or slave. Therefore, slavery was not practiced in Loroth, and it became a favored destination for runaway slaves fleeing from Valyria. Despite Braavos having similar background, Loroth somehow developed quite differently from its neighbor, mostly because of the influence of the followers of the Blind God, since they continued to dominate Loroth for several centuries, till their numbers began to dwindle gradually, both due to new settlers moving into the city from Andalos and Ib, and descendants of the original settlers simply losing interest in such an abstinent faith. Also, it is said that Blind God's priests became corrupt and more concerned with collecting wealth than observing the faith, which is odd, because there are not many ways for the gold to be spent by the blind eunuchs. Eventually, small folk rose in rebellion, slaying the priests of the Blind God. Their cultural stamps are seen all over the Lorothi lifestyle. Just like the blind priests, Lorothi nobles consider it vulgar to speak of oneself directly, for example. After the fall of the blind priests, Loroth came to be ruled over by a council of 3 princes. The Harvest Prince was chosen by a vote of all those who owned land upon the islands, the Fisher Prince by all those who owned ships, and the Prince of the Streets by the acclamation of the free men of the city. Once chosen, each prince served for life. Through time, however, a council of magisters made up of nobles, priests, and merchants started to wield the true power in the city. Though possessing large fleets of fishing vessels, the Lorothi are not a warlike people, and therefore build few warships and have little in the way of military power. Small wonder they have little control over the acclaimed region. City's domains include the 3 principal islands of the archipelago, a score of smaller isles and outcrops, and a thickly forested peninsula south of the isles. The Lorothi also claim dominion over the waters of Loroth Bay, but fishing fleets from Braavos and Ibnese whalers often venture into the bay, paying little notion towards Lorothi claims. Though Loroth even has a fishing and mining colony, Morosh, a city along the shore of the Shivering Sea, where Braavos allows fisherfolk from Morosh to fish. Oddly enough, Lorothi seem to prefer to trade with their nearer neighbors, who do not respect their interests, Norvos, Braavos, and Ib. It almost seems that they prefer to be blind, just like their previous rulers. If so, they should learn from their mistakes. Then again, if the Lorothi prefer not to see threats coming from their neighbors, why would they depict labyrinths on own coins? Mustn't one see the path in order to walk it? So maybe the coin itself is the map, since gold rules the world. Their neighbors, Braavosi, were smart enough to understand that. Blind men are in no need for the lighthouses, and since Braavosi built an enormous one in their city, it gained them even more wealth. Thus, it's not about the darkness or labyrinths or abstinence, it's about finding light in the darkness, and those who do not understand that keep roaming in the labyrinths of their minds, abstinent from pleasures of the world, blinded. But then again, blind priests were removed from power only when they became greedy, or so the history tells us. Kohoric priests of the Black Goat, for instance, cannot truly be called holy men, yet their city blooms. Thus, it seems simple folk are not in need of just deity and equality, they are in need of wealth. And doesn't matter what's depicted on that coin of gold, demonic bloodthirsty goat or labyrinth shrouded in darkness. Even the Dothraki started to accept tributes in gold, though they are in denial of trade. So, are the gods really that different? Thank you for watching. See ya.